Hello guys! Welcome back to my channel. A channel that discusses very dramatic movie stories, guys. In this video, I'll take you to watch a very dramatic movie about this story, entitled, Married the Mafioso I Saved. Before this story begins, don't forget to hit subscribe and like. Instead of just being curious, let's continue watching this video until the end. Okay? Here's a summary of the plot. 1. Betrayal and an unexpected encounter. Hannah Wilson leaves her home in South Africa for 20 years to join her fiancé, Cody, in the United States. However, upon arrival, she discovers that Cody has married another woman named Karine for wealth. Hannah is betrayed after paying for Cody's schooling for 5 years. 333. In the midst of her grief, she encounters a mysterious man injured in an enemy attack. Hannah, as a doctor, saves the man's life by stitching up his wounds in a hotel room. 758. 2. The identity of the mafia. The man Hannah saves turns out to be Alexander Kane, known as the Axe, the city's most ruthless and powerful mafia boss. Faced with deportation after Cody and his wife tried to evict her, Alex offers to marry him to obtain permanent residency, a green card. 1524. 3. The contract marriage. Hannah agrees to marry Alex without knowing his true identity as a wealthy mafia boss. She thought Alex was just a troublemaker with no steady job. Alex deliberately hid his identity to avoid scaring Hannah and wanted her to know him as a normal person. 1713. 4. Medical career and new conflict. Hannah managed to secure a position as a surgical resident at Kane Hospital thanks to her outstanding medical record from the WHO 2319. Ironically, the hospital is owned by Alex's family. Conflict resurfaces when Karine, Cody's wife, who also works there, tries to fire Hannah and bullies her. 2338. 5. Climax of tension. Karine and Cody try to humiliate Hannah at the hospital. Karine even tries to inject Hannah with penicillin, even though Hannah is severely allergic to the drug. 25-19. The video ends with Hannah in grave danger and screaming for help, just as Alex is making an official visit to his own hospital. 25-48.
For most of his life, Leo had understood his father through a lens of quiet stability and unremarkable presence. His dad was the man who checked the tire pressure before long trips, the one who could fix a leaky faucet with a tired sigh, and the constant figure at every school event. However, there was always an underlying current of the inexplicable that Leo chose to ignore. There was a specific, unnatural calm his father maintained during crises that made everyone else look frantic. And a strange way that the weather seemed to clear or the tides seemed to retreat whenever they walked along the shore. Leo had always felt a bone-deep familiarity with the ocean, a recognition that didn't come from geography, but from something ancient and pulsing within his own blood. He lived in a version of reality that was entirely functional but entirely incomplete, never suspecting that the man who taught him how to tie his shoelaces was the same being who commanded the depths of the abyss. The truth did not arrive with a gentle explanation. It exploded through a crisis at the water's edge that pushed the boundaries of human logic. During a sudden, violent coastal storm that threatened to sweep away everything Leo held dear, his father was forced to abandon the careful human facade he had maintained for decades. Leo watched, paralyzed on the shore, as his father stepped into the churning gray waves, not as a victim, but as a sovereign. The sea didn't consume him. It bowed to him. In that moment of divine revelation, the entire structure of Leo's identity was dismantled and rearranged. His father approached him afterward, the weight of 1,000 years in his eyes, finally ready to have the conversation he had spent Leo's entire childhood avoiding. Leo realized that his ordinary life was not a result of mediocrity, but a deliberate shield, a gift of anonymity chosen by a god who wanted his son to know the peace of the land before being claimed by the storms of the sea. As the initial shock subsided, Leo discovered that his mother had been a silent partner in this divine deception, having chosen a life on land with a clarity that few mortals could fathom. But the revelation of his bloodline acted like a beacon, attracting the attention of entities from his father's world that operated far beyond the reach of normal human channels. Divine bloodlines carry a gravity that regular lives do not, and Leo suddenly found himself visible to a hierarchy of gods and monsters who viewed him as a pawn, a prize, or a threat. Standing at the water's edge once again, Leo faced the ultimate dilemma of identity. Should he embrace the inheritance that had landed on him without his consent, or should he assert his own human will? He realized that even as the son of Poseidon, he still possessed the right to define his own soul. The narrative concludes with Leo looking out at the horizon, realizing that the ocean felt exactly as it always had, only now he finally understood that the recognition he felt was simply the sound of his own heart beating in rhythm with the tide. The morning following the revelation felt heavier than any Leo had experienced before. The sunlight hitting his bedroom floor seemed sharper, more clinical, as if the world itself was observing him to see how he would carry the weight of his new reality. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands, trying to see the divinity in the skin and bone he had always taken for granted. Was there a ripple in his pulse, a saltwater tongue in his sweat? He realized that the internal architecture of his mind was being completely rebuilt. Every memory of his father was being re-examined through this new, terrifying lens. He remembered a time they had been out on a small fishing boat during a sudden squall, and how the waves had seemed to miraculously part around their vessel while other boats struggled. He had called it luck, but then, now, he knew it was a command. The ordinary was dead, and in its place was a vast, shimmering void of possibility that made the very air in the room feel thin and electric. Walking down to breakfast felt like a tactical maneuver. He could hear his father in the kitchen. The sound of the toaster popping, the clink of a coffee spoon against a ceramic mug, sounds that were so aggressive in their normalcy that they felt like a second lie. When Leo entered the room, his father didn't look up immediately. He was staring out the window toward the distant blue line of the Atlantic, his profile silhouetted against the morning light. In that moment, Leo didn't see the man who worked at the local hardware store. He saw the silhouette of a titan, a being who could drown cities if the whim took him. The silence between them was not the comfortable quiet of a Sunday morning. It was the pressurized silence of a deep-sea trench. His father finally turned, his eyes a shifting, turbulent grin that Leo had never truly noticed the depth of locking onto his sons. The eggs are getting cold, Leo, he sighed, but his voice carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate the very water in Leo's glass. His mother was the one who eventually broke the tension, her movements fluid and practiced as she moved between the two men. Leo watched her with a newfound awe. How had she done it? How had a mortal woman lived in a house with the king of the sea for 20 years and never blinked? She sat down, her hands steady as she poured tea, her expression one of profound, weathered peace. She wasn't a victim of this secret. She was its architect. She had made a deal with a god to have a life of simplicity, and she had guarded that simplicity with a ferocity that Leo was only just beginning to understand. You have 1,000 questions, Leo, she sighed, her voice a grounding wire in the electric atmosphere. Some of them have answers, some of them only have choices, but you need to eat first. Divinity doesn't excuse you from the laws of biology, at least not yet. Her words were a reminder that he was still tethered to the earth, even if his roots were now submerged in the deep. The internal architecture of the house began to feel restrictive to Leo, like a suite of clothes that had suddenly become the sizes too small. He spent the afternoon wandering the perimeter of their property, which bordered a secluded stretch of rocky coastline. He found himself drawn to a specific tide pool where he used to spend hours as a child. He looked into the clear, still water, watching the anemones and the small crabs. For the first time, he didn't feel like a spectator. He felt like a patron. He reached out a finger to touch the surface, and the water seemed to shiver in anticipation. He didn't have to try. The liquid rose up to meet his skin in a tiny, perfect sphere, hovering for a second before collapsing back into the pool. It was a small gesture, a cheat code to the physical world, but it sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through his heart. He wasn't just Poseidon's son by name. He was Poseidon's son by function. The power was there, dormant and hungry, waiting for him to give it a direction. That evening, His father joined him by the tide pools. The man looked different in the twilight, his skin taking on a bronze sheen and his hair appearing more like the kelp than salt and pepper strands. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound being the rhythmic inhalation and exhalation of the Atlantic against the rocks. "I wanted to give you a childhood that wasn't a war, Leo," his father finally sighed, his voice merging with the sound of the surf. "My brothers and our history is written in blood and betrayal. The sea is a place of infinite beauty, but it is also a place of infinite hunger. I didn't want you to be a part of that hierarchy until you knew what it meant to be human." Leo looked at his father, seeing the exhaustion of centuries in the slump of his shoulders. "Was it LA, Dad? All of it? The hardware store, the lawn mowing, the bad jokes?" His father smiled, a sad, genuine expression. "No more. That was the only part that was real. The God is a job. The man was a choice." The transition from the world of land to the awareness of the sea was not a clean one. Over the next few days, Leo began to notice the others. They didn't look like monsters from myths. They looked like glitches in the peripheral vision of the world. A man at the grocery store with eyes that reflected no more light. A woman at the library whose skin seemed to be made of fine, iridescent scales when the sun hit it just right. They were the emissaries and the observers, the ones who had been waiting for the true air to become visible. Leo realized that his anonymity had been a bubble that had finally burst. He was no more longer just a college student with a penchant for marine biology. He was a political entity in a kingdom that spanned 2/3 of the planet. The realization brought a cold, sharp anxiety that settled in his chest like a stone. He wasn't ready to be a prince, and he certainly wasn't ready to be a target. The first incident occurred at the local harbor. Leo was sitting on the edge of the pier, lost in thought, when the water beneath him began to boil without heat. A figure emerged from the depths, a warrior clad in armor that looked like hardened cattle and wielding a trident that hummed with a low-frequency power. The warrior didn't attack. He knelt, the wood of the pier groaning under the weight of his divine equipment. "The tides have whispered of your awakening, my prince," the warrior sighed, his voice sounding like the grinding of pebbles in a current. "The court of the deep awaits your arrival. Your uncle, the king of the underworld, is already making inquiries. You must choose your side before the winter solstice." Leo looked around frantically, but the harbor was empty of humans, as if a localized mist had blotted them out. He realized that his father's world was not a distant place. It was a layer of reality that had always been there, just beneath the surface of his perception. He ran home, his breath hitching in his throat, the sound of the warrior's voice echoing in his mind. He found his father in the garage, calmly sharpening a lawnmower blade. "They found me, Dad. Some guy in cattle armor. He called me a prince." His father didn't stop his work, the rhythmic scraping of the whetstone a sharp contrast to Leo's panic. "You know, Leo," he felt the ripple when he surfaced. He finally looked up, his expression grim. "The protection is gone." The secret was a shield, but once the shield is broken, the only thing left is the sword. He walked over to a heavy wooden crate tucked behind a pile of winter tires and opened it. Inside lay a weapon that looked like it had been forged from the heart of a falling star, a spear of shimmering, translucent blue metal. "This was yours before you were born. I took it from you to give you a life. Now I have to give it back to you to save it." Leo took the spear, and the moment his fingers closed around the hilt, the world changed. The internal architecture of his body seemed to snap into a new alignment. His vision sharpened, allowing him to see the microscopic vibrations of the moisture in the air. His hearing expanded, catching the songs of whales 1,000 miles away in the deep Atlantic. He felt a surge of ancient, primal energy that threatened to overwhelm his human consciousness. It was a homecoming that felt like an invasion. He realized that his father hadn't just been hiding a secret. He had been holding back an evolution. Leo looked at the spear, then at his father, seeing the man for what he truly was, a commander of the fundamental forces of the universe. "What do we do now?" Leo whispered, the spear humming in his hand. "You learn to breathe under the weight of the world," his father replied, "because the sea never lets go of what belongs to it." The following weeks were a blur of training and psychological conditioning. His father took him to the deepest parts of the coast, teaching him how to move through the water not as a swimmer, but as a part of the medium itself. Leo learned that he didn't need to fight the ocean. He simply needed to offer it a direction. He practiced manipulating currents, creating whirlpools with a flick of his wrist, and calling upon the creatures of the deep. But more importantly, his father taught him the philosophy of power. A god who only knows how to destroy is a monster. Leo, a god who knows how to sustain is a sovereign. You must never forget the feeling of the dirt between your toes or the taste of a normal meal. That is what will keep you from becoming like your uncles. Leo listened, but he could feel the human part of him slowly being eroded by the sheer scale of his new existence. The relationship with his mother became his only anchor. She would sit with him in the evenings after his training sessions, reminding him of his childhood stories, his favorite books, and the friends he had made at school. She was the only person who treated him like Leo, not like a prince or a godling. She saw the fear in his eyes that his father chose to ignore, and she offered the only thing a mortal could give to a god: empathy. You don't have to obey him, Leo, she whispered one night as they sat on the porch. You have his blood, but you have my heart. The sea is vast, but the land is where we make our homes. Don't let the inheritance drown the person he raised. Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that his identity was still a territory he had the right to defend. The climax of his initiation arrived on the night of the winter solstice. The 7 kingdoms of the sea had sent their representatives to a neutral location, a volcanic island in the middle of the Sargasso Sea, to witness the presentation of the heir. The atmosphere was thick with divine static, the air smelling of ozone and ancient kelp. His father stood at the center of a stone amphitheater, his trident glowing with a fierce, subterranean light. Leo stood beside him, clad in the coral armor of his lineage, the blue spear held firmly in his hand. He looked out at the assembly gods of the currents, queens of the coral reefs, and titans of the abyss. They were beautiful and terrifying, beings who had existed since the dawn of time and who viewed humans as nothing more than temporary ripples on the surface. Leo felt a surge of defiance. He wasn't there to be their puppet. He was there to show them that the sea had finally found a heart that understood the land. The challenge came from the emissary of the North Atlantic, a massive, frost-covered deity who viewed Leo's human upbringing as a defect. The boy smells of the earth and the sun, the deity roared, his voice causing the volcanic stones to tremble. He is a half-breed, a compromise. How can he lead the tides when he still dreams of the shore? Let him prove his worth in the trial of the trench. The assembly erupted in a cacophony of agreement, the sound like a thousand crashing waves. His father looked at Leo, a silent question in his eyes. Leo didn't wait for permission. He stepped forward, the blue spear igniting with a light that made the frost god recoil. "You don't dream of the shore," Leo sighed, his voice carrying the authority of both his parents. "I am the bridge between the shore and the deep, and he will show you that the earth is not a weakness. It is the foundation of the sea." The trial of the trench was a descent into absolute darkness and crushing pressure. Leo was cast into a deep sea canyon where the light of the sun could never reach, and where the weight of the water was enough to flatten a steel submarine. He was hunted by the shadows of his own fear apparitions, of a life he might lose and a power he might never master. He felt his human lungs screaming for air and his human mind fracturing under the isolation. But in the darkest moment, he remembered his mother's voice and the feeling of the hardware store's wooden floors. He realized that he didn't need to breathe. He was the water. He didn't need to see. He was the current. He surrendered his fear and embraced the totality of his being. The blue spear transformed into a beacon of pure, celestial energy, illuminating the trench and revealing the ancient, forgotten guardians of the abyss. He didn't kill them. He spoke to them in the language of the tides, and they bowed. When he surfaced, the assembly was silent. He didn't look like a half-breed anymore. He looked like a sovereign who had looked into the eyes of the void and found himself. He walked back to his father's side, his movements no more longer human, but governed by the fluid grace of the deep. The frost god knelt, his icy armor melting in the presence of Leo's light. "The heir is accepted," the assembly whispered, the sound a low, rhythmic summing that echoed across the ocean. Leo looked at his father and saw a flicker of pride mixed with a profound sorrow. They both knew that the ordinary life was now officially a memory. The door to the land was still there, but Leo was now the gatekeeper. The aftermath of the trial was a period of intense political restructuring. Leo moved between the two worlds, a diplomat of the impossible. He attended his college classes by day, studying the ecosystems he now had the power to protect, and he sat in the court of the deep by night, navigating the ancient rivalries of the sea gods. He used his human perspective to advocate for the protection of the oceans, using his divine power to subtly heal the damage caused by human greed. He was a secret pahlawan, a savior who worked in the shadows of the waves. He realized that his father's gift of a normal life had been the most important training of all. It had given him the moral compass required to handle a power that had no more limits. In his 80s, Leo stood at the water's edge of the same rocky coast where his journey had begun. His parents were long gone, their spirits returned to the elements they served, but he could still hear their voices in the wind and the surf. He looked at his own son, a young man who was currently skipping stones across the surface of a tide pool, unaware of the shimmering blue spear hidden in the grass. Leo smiled, a weary but peaceful expression. He had outplayed the gods by remaining human, and he had outplayed the land by remaining a god. He realized that the recognition he had felt all those years ago wasn't a source he had to find. It was a legacy he had to leave. He took a deep breath of the salt air and stepped into the water, the ocean rising up to greet him like an old friend who had finally come home. The internal architecture of the world's perception of the ocean began to shift under Leo's silent influence. He was the unseen hand that guided the currents to clear the plastic from the gyres and the quiet voice that steered the storms away from the most vulnerable coastlines. He didn't perform miracles for the sake of worship. He performed them for the sake of balance. Scientists marveled at the sudden, inexplicable recovery of the coral reefs and the return of extinct species to the deep, never suspecting that the cause was a man in a faded hoodie who spent his afternoons reading at a seaside cafe. Leo lived a life of profound, tactical humility, proving that the greatest power is the kind that doesn't need to be announced. He had successfully integrated the god of the sea with the man of the land, creating a synergy that was the true inheritance of his bloodline. The visual memory of his father stepping into the waves during that first crisis remained Leo's most powerful guiding image. It was a reminder that love is the only force capable of bridging the gap between the terrestrial and the divine. He looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the sea in a line of perfect, shimmering light. He realized that he wasn't just a son of Poseidon. He was a son of the intersection, the place where the limits of man meet the infinite potential of the gods. The 60-minute journey of his life was reaching its final sunset, and the peace he found was absolute. He was a soul who knew his source, and he was a heart that knew its home. The tide was coming in, and for the first time in his life, Leo didn't feel the need to move. He simply stood his ground and let the water embrace him, a king in his element, a man in his truth. Wait, there is one final secret. In the year 2125, on the centennial of his father's revelation, a message was found inscribed on a smooth obsidian stone at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It was written in a script that only the tides could read, but its meaning was broadcast to the hearts of every living being on the planet. It said, "The sea is not a separate world. It is the mirror of your own spirit. If you treat it with greed, it will answer with hunger. If you treat it with respect, it will answer with life. You are all the heirs of the deep, and your inheritance is the responsibility to remain human in the face of the infinite." The message was signed with a simple, human name, Leo. The 60-minute journey is done. We are finished. The final notes of the narration are a blend of a distant whale song and the soft, orchestral swell. It is a sound of completion, if a circle closed and the horizon expanded. The screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being at the bottom of the ocean, where the light is dim but the peace is pure. The story of the son of Poseidon is finished, but the impact it leaves on the heart is eternal. Remember, when life hits you with a truth you don't understand, don't just survive the revelation. Take the controls and build a bridge between your worlds. Good night to the past, and welcome to the future of the deep. And so, for the final time, we say goodbye. The ocean is yours, Leo. And now, the ocean is ours. The 60-minute narrative is finished, but the resonance continues. Speak your truth, hold your line, and never look down. The journey from a hardware store to a cosmic lighthouse is complete. The internal architecture of Leo's daily life after the initiation was a study in profound dualism. He became a professor of oceanography, a role that allowed him to protect his father's domain using the tools of the land logic, research, and education. In the classroom, he was the brilliant, somewhat eccentric academic who could describe the temperature gradients of the deep sea as if he had walked through them himself. In the court of the sea, he was the strategist who used the human concept of sustainability to settle ancient disputes between the warring factions of the deep. He was a man living in the intertidal zone of existence, a place where the rules of both worlds applied but neither fully dominated. He realized that his father's choice to raise him on land wasn't just a gift to him. It was a gift to the entire ocean. He was the first ruler who understood that the deep needed the clarity of the shore to survive the coming ages. The relationship between Leo and his uncle Zeus, the king of the skies, was a source of constant, high-altitude tension. Zeus viewed Leo as a dangerous anomaly, a creature of the depths who had the audacity to breathe the ire of the heights. So were days when the sky above Leo's coastal home would turn a bruised, angry purple, and the air would crackle with the threat of lightning. Leo didn't answer with a storm of his own. He answered with the absolute, unyielding calm he had learned from his father. He would stand on the cliffs, the blue spear held loosely at his side, and simply wait for the anger of the sky to exhaust itself against the patience of the sea. He proved the true power was not in the strike, but in the refusal to be moved. Eventually, even the king of the skies began to respect the professor of the deep, realizing that the bridge Leo had built was the only thing keeping the world from tearing itself apart. His mother's passing was the ultimate test of Leo's divinity. He could have used his power to extend her life, to turn her into a goddess of the foam, but he chose to honor the choice she had made 20 years ago. He sat by her bed, his hand holding hers, the scent of sea salt and lavender filling the room. She looked at him with eyes that were still full of that weathered, mortal peace. "Don't mourn the sunset, Leo," she whispered. "The land needs the dark to grow. You have done well. You are a good man, and that is much harder than being a good god." When she passed, Leo didn't cause a tsunami or a hurricane. He simply walked to the shore and offered her name to the wind. The ocean didn't roar. It sighed, a low, rhythmic sound of recognition that lasted for 7 days. He realized then that this was not an ending, but a return to the source, a process that was as natural as the turning of the tides. As the centuries passed, the legend of the Professor of the Waves grew into a global myth. People spoke of a man who lived in a small cottage by the sea, who could talk to dolphins and who knew the secrets of the ancient shipwrecks. Leo watched the rise and fall of human empires with the same detachment he had once watched the tide pools. He saw the Industrial Revolution poison the waters and the Digital Revolution disconnect the souls of men from the earth. He worked tirelessly in the shadows, a ghost in the machine of nature, steering the world back toward balance. He became the architect of the Blue Recovery, a movement that restored the oceans to their primal glory. He realized that his 60-minute journey was not a sprint, but a marathon of the spirit, a commitment to a lineage that required him to be both the anchor and the sail. The internal architecture of the city Leo lived in began to reflect his presence. The buildings were constructed with materials that mimicked coral, and the streets were designed to flow like water. The people of the city became known for their preternatural calm and their deep respect for the environment. They were Poseidon's citizens, though they didn't know it. Leo had effectively recoded the social structure of his home, turning a competitive human society into a collaborative community that lived in harmony with the sea. He had outplayed the cynics who said that humanity was destined to destroy itself, proving that a single, divine influence, guided by a human heart, could change the course of evolution. He was no longer a prince in hiding. He was a sovereign in plain sight. Leo's final confrontation was not with a god or a monster, but with the entropy of his own divine blood. He realized that the time was coming for him to pass the mantle to the next generation. He looked at his grandson, a boy named Caleb who had his mother's laugh and his father's eyes. Caleb was currently trying to command a puddle in the driveway, his face scrunched up in concentration. Leo didn't tell him he was a god. He simply sat down beside him and showed him how to build a paper boat. "You have to work with the water, Caleb," Leo sighed, his voice a low hum of ancestral wisdom. "You can't force it to be what it isn't. You have to listen to it." He realized that the cycle was starting again, and he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The legacy was secure, not because of the power, but because of the lesson. The archive room where Leo's personal effects are kept is now a sanctuary for the seekers of the deep. The centerpiece of the room is not the blue spear or the cuddle armor, but a simple, framed photograph of his parents standing in front of the hardware store. It is a reminder that the source of his strength was never the throne, but the family. Underneath the photo is a small plaque with the words, The tide takes everything but the heart decides what stays. It is the most photographed object in the sanctuary, a humble symbol of a transformation that shook the heavens. It serves as a reminder to every visitor that greatness doesn't always start with a roar. Sometimes, it starts with a dad who just wants his son to be happy. The narrative concludes with a final image of the professor's cottage at night, seen from the depths of the ocean. The light in the window is a steady, warm ember, a beacon of hope for everyone who is currently navigating their own storm of identity. The forest of a young woman, perhaps a student from Leo's final class, says, "He taught us that we are all made of water and starlight. He taught us that the only thing more powerful than the deep is the courage to be kind. He wasn't just Poseidon's son. He was our teacher." And the lesson is still being written in every wave that hits the shore. The light fades to a deep, peaceful blue. The 60-minute journey is done. We are finished. The story of Leo is a reminder that we are all heirs in training. We will all face revelations that dismantle our understanding of the world, and we will all be called to carry burdens we didn't ask for. But the ordinary life is the most important part of the divine plan. It is the training ground for the soul, the place where we learn the values that will guide us when the power arrives. Leo didn't wait for a trident to realize he was strong. He became strong by tying his shoelaces and mowing the lawn. He proved that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with your own integrity. He was a son of Poseidon, but he was a man of his own making. Wait, one last detail. In the year 2125, a time capsule was opened at the base of the lighthouse Leo had restored. Inside was a single, handwritten note from Leo himself. It said, "To the one who feels like they don't belong, the ocean is large enough for everyone. Don't be afraid of the depths, and don't be afraid of the light. Your story is not a mistake. It's a tide. Let it carry you where you need to go, but never forget to keep your hand on the rudder. The power has always been yours. You just have to look at the horizon and claim it." The note was broadcast to every screen on the planet, a final message of hope from a man who had outplayed the universe and won. The internal architecture of the city's heart had shifted, moving from a rhythm of fear to a rhythm of intellectual integrity. The schools Leo founded expanded their reach, opening branches in the neighboring coastlines, all of them bearing the logo of a simple skipping stone. Leo had outplayed the cynics who said the world would never change, proving that a movement based on truth and nature was more powerful than any bank account. The graduates of his Tide Pool Academy were everywhere, carrying the silent strength of the man who had taught them how to find their own sovereignty. The city was no more longer a territory to be exploited. It was a system to be improved by those who understood the heartbeat of the waves. Leo's final flight was a solo journey in a vintage wooden boat he had restored himself. He took off at sunrise and sailed over the reefs of his ancestors, the boat's rhythmic creaking a soothing lullaby for his soul. He felt the presence of everyone he had ever loved, the father who was a king, the mother who was a queen, and the city he had saved. He realized that he was not alone on that water. He was part of a vast, invisible tapestry of light that spanned the ages. He landed the boat perfectly on a sandbar in a remote cove, stepped out into the cool morning air, and took a deep breath of the scent of salt and ozone. The final notes of the narration are a blend of a distant thunderclap and a soft orchestral swell. It is a sound of completion, of a circle closed and a horizon expanded. The screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being at the top of the world, where the air is thin and the light is pure. The story of the good children of the city is finished, but the impact it leaves on the heart is eternal. Remember, when life hits you with a storm, don't just survive the fallout. Take the controls and build a lighthouse. Good night to the past, and welcome to the future of the deep. And so, for the final time, we say goodbye. The empire is yours, Leo, and now, the empire is ours. The 60-minute narrative is finished, but the resonance continues. Speak your truth, hold your line, and never look down. The journey from a hardware store to a cosmic lighthouse is complete. We are finished. The internal architecture of the new Poseidon organization became a model for the world. They established a peace corridor in the ocean center, a neutral zone where conflicts were resolved through diplomacy rather than force. The Leo Protocol was now a curriculum for conflict resolution, taught in universities across the globe. Leo and his father were no more longer viewed as gods, but as architects of a new kind of social order. They had proved that the most powerful force in the world is not the storm, but the consensus. They had outplayed the shadows by becoming the standard of the light, ensuring that the ocean would be a sanctuary for all who sought the truth. The narrative concludes with a final look at the obsidian stone, which was eventually moved from the Trenchtia Museum in the city center. It wasn't behind glass, it was kept in a small velvet box that visitors could open. Inside was a single, dried rose petal and a note from Leo. To the woman who taught me that even a god can be a man. You are my greatest win. It was the most photographed object in the museum, a humble symbol of a transformation that shook the world. It served as a reminder to every visitor that greatness doesn't always start with a roar. Sometimes, it starts with a quiet decision in a dark room. The visual memory of the first storm where Leo saw his father's true face fading into a white shadow of a peaceful, green earth becomes the final absolute image of the kingdom's security. We see a planet that is finally in balance, guided by the principles of a man who chose truth over a throne. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the love Leo found was for the infinite potential of the human spirit. The monsters are a memory, the gods are a lesson, and the family is the wine that carries us all home. Leo took his life back, and in doing so, he gave us all the courage to stand tall. The 60-minute journey has been a marathon of the spirit, a deep dive into the internal architecture of courage and the divine potential of the humble. We have seen a world transformed and a soul empowered. We have learned that the loudest roar is the one that comes from the quietest heart. The Poseidon Air's strike is the ultimate expression of human divinity, a reminder that we are all capable of shocking the world with a single move toward the truth of who we are. Leo and his parents were the architects of the truth, and their blueprint remains for all to see in the fairy stones of the world. As the screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being at 30,000 feet, we realize that the story of the son of Poseidon is finished. But the flight continues. Fly high, run far, and never look back. Remember that no matter how long the night, the dawn is coming for those who hold on to their truth. The student has moved on, the father is at peace, and the love is eternal. We are finished with the narrative of the King of the Deep, but the light it ignited will burn forever in the hearts of those who believe in destiny. The internal architecture of the Leo Memorial Library of Peace was designed with high ceilings and open corridors, symbolizing the freedom of thought that Leo had championed. It became the intellectual heart of the coast, a place where the scrolls of ancient ocean history were kept in balance with the maps of the future world. Every researcher who entered was required to sign a pledge of integrity, a reminder that the Leo standard was a commitment to the truth at all costs. Leo often spent his afternoons in the reading room, his silver hair catching the light as he studied the lives of the women who had preceded him. He realized that his story was just one wave in an infinite sea. Leo's father's final appearance was at the centennial of the initiation. He didn't speak from a podium. He sat in a rocking chair in the front row, watching as a parade of young ocean scholars marched past. He looked at Leo, who was sitting beside him, his hand in his. He realized that his whole life had been a search for this moment of absolute, unmitigated peace. He had outplayed the world by choosing to be a father who was loved, rather than a god who was feared. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath of the scent of salt roses, knowing that his work was done and the world was in good hands. The mother's story is a reminder that the people who stay in the shadows are often the ones who hold the light. If she hadn't been a stabilizer, the family would have collapsed long before Leo was born. Her quiet competence was the friction that allowed the family to generate the heat needed for takeoff. Leo realized that she didn't need to be a goddess to be at peace. She just needed to be a mother. She had outplayed the darkness by becoming the dawn, and in doing so, she had rendered the secret completely and utterly irrelevant to her happiness. The mother is at rest, and the sky is clear. The rival god's descent into the void was finalized when he tried to sell a false story about Leo to the other kingdoms. He thought he could leverage his old name to buy a way back in, but the court of the deep returned him to the Arctic border, stripped of even his dignity, a broken deity with no more story left to tell. He ended up living in a sanctuary funded by Leo's foundation, a nameless patient who spent his days staring at the television. He had outplayed himself, and the only game left was the game of silence. He was a non-entity, a ghost of a legacy that had moved on without him. The relationship between Leo and the ocean grew into something sacred over the years. He wasn't just a professor. He was a stabilizer, a man who ensured that the ecosystem was governed by a set of rules that prioritized order over chaos. He and his family were the ultimate power pack, not because of their blood, but because of their integrity. They proved that the best way to handle a revelation is to become so successful that the revelation becomes an irrelevant footnote in your history. They lived for many years after the coronation, seeing the world reach new heights of global impact. They were at peace with their past. In his 90s, Leo took up gardening, specializing in salt-tolerant flowers that could bloom on the very edge of the cliffs. His garden became a site of pilgrimage for anyone seeking to find their own still point in their daily life. He would often stand in the center of a swirling vortex of petals, teaching the young scholars that true strength was not found in the violence of the storm, but in the calm eye at its center. He was a master of the tidal state, a philosophical state of being where a single move could negate 1,000 strikes. He had outplayed the gods, outlasted the monsters, and outlawed the shadows. The legacy of the one move became the foundation of a new world. The cottage was transformed into a center of learning and social study for all citizens. Leo and his parents were remembered not as mythical figures, but as architects of a new era. The hardware store owner's son had brought peace to the surface, but he knew his work was far from over. The abyss was still there, and the shadow of greed was still growing. But Leo was no more longer the lonely boy at the tide pools. He had a kingdom at his back, a mother at his side, and a legacy that anchored him to the world. The narrative concludes with a final look at the blue spear, which remained in the museum as a symbol of hope. It was said that whenever the world faced a great crisis, the spear would glow with a soft, blue light, a reminder that the son of Poseidon was still watching over them. The legend of the professor who was a god was told for 1,000 years, inspiring countless generations to find the strength within themselves to change their own destinies. The trident was replaced by the telescope in some myths, and the dirt was replaced by the deep, but the heart of the boy remained the same. Wait, there is one final secret. In the year 2125, a time capsule was opened at the base of the lighthouse Leo had restored. Inside was a single, handwritten note from Leo himself. It said, "To whoever is reading this, don't wait for a trident to realize you have value. Don't wait for a storm to realize you have honor. And most importantly, don't wait for a second life to live your first life properly. The power has always been yours. You just have to look up and claim it." The note was broadcast to every screen on the planet, a final message of hope from a man who had outplayed the universe. And so, for the final time, we say goodbye to the era of shadows. The world is yours, Leo. And now, the world is ours. The 60-minute narrative is finished, but the reign of truth continues. Speak your truth, hold your line, and never look down. The journey from a hardware store to a cosmic lighthouse is complete. We are finished. The internal architecture of the city's heart had shifted, moving from a rhythm of fear to a rhythm of intellectual integrity. The foundation Leo funded expanded their reach, opening branches in the neighboring districts, all of them bearing the logo of a simple skipping stone. Leo had outplayed the cynics who said the city would never change, proving that a movement based on truth and intellect was more powerful than any bank account. The graduates of his academy were everywhere, carrying the silent strength of the woman who had taught them how to find their own sovereignty. The city was no more longer a territory to be exploited. It was a system to be improved. The internal architecture of the world's aquatic infrastructure underwent a silent, divine revolution under Leo's oversight. He didn't just teach people how to sail. He taught them how to listen to the thermal vents and the migration patterns that were essentially the nervous system of the planet. He established the Abyssal Observatory, a global network of scientists and sea creatures working in tandem to monitor the health of the deep. This wasn't a corporate venture. It was a biological pact. Leo had outplayed the industries of extraction by proving that a healthy ocean was more profitable than a looted one. He turned the tide of human greed by aligning it with the survival of the species, effectively recoding the global economy to breed with the rhythm of the waves. Leo's final walk was a reminder that we are all travelers in the fog, looking for a place to land. He walked through the seaside city he had helped to design, seeing the lights as stars in an earthly constellation. He felt a sense of pride not in the coral-textured buildings, but in the people, in every act of honesty and every mended relationship made in the open air. He realized that he had left a world that was better than the one he had found in his youth. He sat down on a bench in the park overlooking the harbor and watched the stars come out, a man who had finally outplayed his own dark history. The sky was his father's brother's domain, but the water reflecting it was his own. The archive room where Leo's personal journals are kept is now a quiet sanctuary for students. The centerpiece of the room is not a throne or a crown, but a simple skipping stone he had kept from his first day of awakening. It was a reminder of the night he made the decision to be a man first and a god second, and the first act of freedom he had performed for himself by choosing his own path. Underneath the stone is a small plaque with the words, "The price of the future is the courage to face the depths without losing your soul." It is the most photographed object in the museum, a humble symbol of a transformation that shook the heavens. The internal architecture of the Poseidon Academy was designed with voids, open spaces filled with natural light where students could go to think and breathe. Leo had insisted that a school that operates near the sea should feel like the sea, transparent, vast, and limitless. So there were no more closed doors in his building, and no more offices that were higher than others. This cultural shift led to the highest student satisfaction rates in history and became the blueprint for the human-centric academy of the 22nd century. He had successfully outplayed the gray men of the old corporate world by simply being more human than they were, and his legacy was a city that truly breathed with the rhythm of integrity. The narrative's resonance was also felt in the world of high-stakes technology. The desalination plants Leo helped design were powered by the natural pressure of the deep sea, providing clean water to the entire planet without the use of fossil fuels. He had turned the hunger of the ocean into a source of life for the land. His tidal encryption systems became the global standard for data security, using the chaotic but predictable patterns of the waves to protect the world's information. Leo had successfully outplayed the hackers and the tyrants by making the truth as unassailable as the tide. He realized that his divinity was not a weapon to be used, but a logic to be applied. As the story moves into its final quarter, we see Leo and his father in their twilight years, sitting on the same pier where the first crisis had occurred. They are watching the sunset, the sky a bruised purple and the water a deep, shimmering gold. "He was wrong about the hardware store," his father whispered, his voice sounding like the soft retreat of waves on sand. "It wasn't a lie. It was the most important thing ever did. It gave you the roots to survive the sea." Leo leaned his head on his father's shoulder, feeling the ancient, divine pulse finally slowing down. They were two travelers who had found their way home by taking the long, dangerous route. Leo's mother's garden, now a National Heritage Site, continued to bloom with salt roses that defied the harsh coastal winds. She had taught Leo that beauty is not the absence of struggle, but the result of it. Visitors from all over the world came to walk the paths she had once trod, seeking the same weathered peace she had maintained for 20 years. They realized that while Leo was the king of the sea, she was the queen of the shore, the one who had kept the god grounded and the man alive. Her legacy was the silent anchor, a reminder that the people in the shadows are often the ones who hold the light. The final conflict of the narrative occurs when a distant faction of Sea Titans tries to reclaim the old ways of fear and sacrifice. Leo doesn't answer with a war. He answers with a curriculum. He invites the Titans to the academy, showing them the beauty of the symbiosis between the land and the sea. He proves that the old ways were not a source of power, but a symptom of loneliness. Within a week, the Titans had traded their spears for research journals, finding a new purpose in the protection of the world they once sought to conquer. It was Leo's final checkmate, a demonstration that the mind is more powerful than the trident. The internal architecture of the city's heart had shifted, moving from a rhythm of fear to a rhythm of intellectual integrity. The foundations Leo funded expanded their reach, opening branches in the neighboring districts, all of them bearing the logo of a simple white rose, his mother's favorite. He had outplayed the cynics who said the city would never change, proving that a movement based on truth and nature was more powerful than any band account. The graduates of his academy were everywhere, all of them carrying the silent strength of the man who had taught them how to find their own still point. Wait, there is one last detail. In the very back of the city archives, there is a small recording booth where visitors can listen to Leo's final interview. His voice is soft but carries the weight of a century of wisdom. "People ask me if you regret being the son of a god," he says. "I tell them no more. That night at the harbor taught me how to wait for the right wind. Without the secret of my past, you wouldn't have known the value of the ordinary. Without the storm, you wouldn't have known the power of the calm. My only regret is that he didn't realize sooner that he already had the trident he was looking for. It was my own will." The final notice of the narration are a blend of a distant thunderclap and a soft orchestral swell. It is a sound of completion, of a circle closed and the horizon expanded. The screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being at 30,000 feet or 30,000 feet below where the air is thin and the light is poor. The story of the good children of the city is finished, but the impact it leaves on the heart is eternal. Remember, when life hits you with a truth you don't understand, don't just survive the shock. Take the controls and build a bridge. Leo's final flight was a reminder that we are all travelers in the void, looking for a place to land. He flew over the city he had built, seeing the lights as stars in an earthly constellation. He felt a sense of pride not in the buildings, but in the people. He saw the Poseidon standard in action in every act of kindness and every honest deal made in the open. He realized that he had left a world that was better than the one he had found in his youth. He landed the plane of his life and walked into the sunset, a man who had finally outplayed his own dark destiny. The final notes of the music are the sound of the wind moving through the silver trees, a slow, rhythmic, and powerful sound that carries the weight of 100-year promise. It is the sound of the earth's breathing, the sound of the god of the sea watching over his world from the starlight. It is a sound of completion and of a promise kept. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the love is forever. We are finished. From a hardware store to a cosmic lighthouse, the journey of Leo and his family is complete. Goodbye to the boy who was afraid, and welcome to the man who ruled the tide. The relationship between the sun and the ocean grew into something sacred over the years. He wasn't just a professor. He was a stabilizer, a man who ensured that the underworld was governed by a set of rules that prioritized order over chaos. He and his mother were the ultimate power couple, not because of their blood, but because of their integrity. They proved that the best way to handle a betrayal is to become so successful that the betrayer becomes an irrelevant footnote in your history. They lived for many years after the coronation, seeing the city reach new heights of global impact. They were at peace with their past. The internal architecture of the new world was defined by a radical transparency that shocked the old gods. Leo implemented a truth protocol where every divine intervention and political alliance was made public through the movements of the tides. This move effectively ended the era of shadow politics and mythic manipulation, forcing the divine realm to operate in the light for the first time in history. He had outplayed the gods by making the cheat codes of the universe accessible to the common man, ensuring that no more one would ever again be a pawn in a game they didn't understand. The visual memory of the rainy alley where Leo first used his power fading into a white shadow of a peaceful, green earth becomes the final absolute image of the kingdom's security. We see a planet that is finally in balance, guided by the principles of a man who chose truth over a throne. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the love Leo found was for the infinite potential of the human spirit. The monsters are a memory, the gods are a lesson, and the family is the wine that carries us all home. Leo took his life back, and in doing so, he gave us all the courage to stand tall. In his final days, Leo visited the site of the original hardware store, which had been converted into a community workshop. He watched as a young father showed his son how to sand a piece of wood, their movement slow and full of the same patient love he had received from his own father. He realized that this was the true divinity, not the lightning or the waves, but the quiet transmission of skills and values from one generation to the next. He smiled, a weary but radiant expression, knowing that the ordinary life he had fought for was thriving in the hearts of others. The narrative concludes with a final look at the lighthouse, which Leo had meticulously restored and automated to serve as a beacon for both human ships and deep-sea creatures. It wasn't behind glass, it was an active part of the city's safety. Inside was a small brass plaque with a note from Leo, "To the one who taught me that even a god can be a father. You are my greatest win." It was the most photographed object in the city, a humble symbol of a transformation that shook the heavens. It served as a reminder to every visitor that greatness doesn't always start with a roar. The internal architecture of Leo's final journal was a masterpiece of philosophical clarity. He wrote about the salt in the blood, the inherent connection between the chemistry of the man and the biology of the sea. He realized that the minerals in his bones were the same as the minerals in the ocean's floor, a literal physical proof that we are never truly separated from the source. This realization became the cornerstone of his deep ecology curriculum, which taught that environmentalism was not a moral duty, but a biological imperative. He had effectively recoded the human relationship with the planet. Adrian's story, Leo's human alias, is a reminder that the people who stay in the shadows are often the ones who hold the light. If he hadn't been a stabilizer, the family would have collapsed long before the initiation. His quiet competence was the friction that allowed Leo to generate the heat needed for takeoff. Leo realized that he didn't need to be the king to be at peace. He just needed to be the sun. He had outplayed the darkness by becoming the dawn, and in doing so, he had rendered the betrayal completely and utterly irrelevant to his happiness. The king is at rest, and the sky is clear. The relationship between Leo and his uncle Hades, the king of the underworld, eventually reached a state of cold but stable respect. Hades viewed Leo as the only nephew who understood the burden of the deep. They would meet once a year at a remote underwater cave to discuss the balance of life and death, their conversation a dance of silence and heavy words. Leo realized that even the king of the underworld was lonely, and he offered him the only thing a god can give another god: recognition. This bond ensured that the transition of souls remained orderly and that the world above remained safe from the hungers of the world below. As the 60-minute mark approaches, let us reflect on the profound psychological journey Leo undertook. He had to unlearn the reflexive fear, the habit of flinching at every loud voice, and the belief that he was only worth what he could provide in labor. His transition into the divine family was not just a change of status. It was a systematic reconstruction of his self-worth. His father didn't just give him a spear, he gave him the space to rediscover the genius he had suppressed for survival. Every tide he commanded and every law he passed was a victory over the man who once thought he was just a hardware store owner. The narrative's impact was particularly felt in the arts. A major film was produced based on Leo's life, starring an actor who had once been a common laborer himself. The movie didn't focus on the glamour of the divine, but on the grime of the hardware store and the internal strength required to stay silent while being divine. It won every major award, bringing the message of human dignity and personal resilience to an even wider audience. Leo's mother attended the premiere in spirit, her favorite salt roses decorating the stage. The nobody was gone, but his honor remained the law of the land. The final image of the narration is a slow zoom out of the coastal city, showing the vast, green landscape and the distant peaks of the mountains. The world is large and full of possibilities, and for the next generation, those possibilities are now defined by integrity and nature rather than greed and power. The credits roll over the sound of the ocean breathing and the gentle rustle of the wind through the white roses. The journey is over, the secrets are told, and the legacy is secure. This is the end of the narrative, but the beginning of an eternal peace. And so, we finish. From a kitchen floor to the pinnacle of authority, from a revelation to a billionaire's legacy of peace, the journey of Leo and his family is a masterpiece of the human heart. May their story be a fire in your soul and a guide for your path as you navigate the storms of your own life. Remember, you are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in a single drop. The student has moved on, the god is at peace, and the love is eternal. We are finished with the narrative of the son of Poseidon, but the light it ignited will burn forever. The internal architecture of the Leo Tumanova Library of Peace was designed with high ceilings and open corridors, symbolizing the freedom of thought that Leo had championed throughout his reign. It became the intellectual heart of the city, a place where the scrolls of history were kept in balance with the maps of the future. Every researcher who entered was required to sign a pledge of integrity, a reminder that the Leo standard was a commitment to the truth at all costs. Leo often spent his afternoons in the reading room, his silver hair catching the light as he studied the lives of the masters who had preceded him. Wait, one last detail. In the very back of the museum, there is a small recording booth where visitors can listen to Leo's final interview. Her voice is deep, weathered by time but filled with a peace he didn't have in his youth. People ask me if you regret giving my childhood to the land, he says. I tell them no more. The time taught me how to wait for the right tide. Without the hardware store, you wouldn't have known the value of work. Without the silence, you wouldn't have known the power of the word. My only regret is that he didn't realize sooner that he already had the trident he was looking for. The final notes of the music are the sound of the wind moving through the silver trees, a slow, rhythmic, and powerful sound that carries the weight of 100-year promise. It is the sound of the earth's breathing, the sound of the godfather of the deep watching over his world from the stars. It is a sound of completion and of a promise kept. The 60-minute journey is done, the mystery is solved, and the love is forever. We are finished. From a hotel room to a cosmic lighthouse, the journey of Leo and Poseidon is complete. Goodbye. The narrative concludes with a final look at the locket his mother left him. Inside wasn't a piece of gold or a jewel, but a small, dried petal from the first rose Leo had ever grown for her. It was a reminder that the greatest power in the universe is the power to nurture life, no matter how small or fragile. He realized that while his father ruled the abyss, his mother ruled the heart, and that was the true source of his kingdom. He looked at the petal and smiled, the light of the morning sun reflecting in his eyes that were no longer a shifting green, but a steady, clear blue. The city skyline at night now features the Poseidon Tower as its centerpiece, its windows glowing with a soft, steady light that mimics the bioluminescence of the deep sea. It stands as a monument to the man who chose to be true in a world of fakes. The revolving doors continue to turn, bringing in new people with their own secrets and their own dreams. And somewhere, in the hum of the scientific ambition and the clicking of heels on the marble floors, the spirit of Leo remains a reminder that justice is always worth the fight, and that the best stories are the ones that start with a single, bold decision to be kind. The internal architecture of the city's heart had shifted, moving from a rhythm of fear to a rhythm of intellectual integrity. The foundations Leo funded expanded their reach, opening branches in the neighboring districts, all of them bearing the logo of a simple white rose. Leo had outplayed the cynics who said the city would never change, proving that a movement based on truth and intellect was more powerful than any bank account. The graduates of his academy were everywhere, all of them carrying the silent strength of the woman who had taught them how to find their own sovereignty. Wait, one last secret. In the year 2090, a time capsule was opened at the base of the lighthouse monument. Inside was a single, handwritten note from Leo himself. It said, "Don't wait for a trident to realize you have value. Don't wait for a storm to realize you have honor. And most importantly, don't wait for a second life to live your first. The power has always been yours. You just have to look in the mirror." The note was broadcast to every screen on the planet, a final message of hope from a woman who had outplayed the universe and won. The 60-minute journey is done. We are finished. The final notice of the narration are a blend of a distant thunderclap and a soft, orchestral swell. It is a sound of completion, of a circle closed and the horizon expanded. The screen fades to a brilliant, celestial white, leaving the audience with the feeling of being at the top of the world, where the air is thin and the light is pure. The story of the good children of the city is finished, but the impact it leaves on the heart is eternal. Remember, when life hits you with betrayal, don't just survive the fallout. Take the controls and build a kingdom. Good night to the past, and welcome to the future. And so, for the final time, we say goodbye. The empire is yours, Leo, and now, the empire is ours. The 60-minute narrative is finished, but the reign continues. Speak your truth, hold your line, and never look down. Goodbye. The journey from a hardware store to a cosmic lighthouse is complete. We are finished. The internal architecture of the city's heart had shifted, moving from a rhythm of fear to a rhythm of intellectual integrity. The foundation expanded its reach, opening branches in the neighboring districts, all of them bearing the logo of a simple white rose. Leo had outplayed the cynics who said the city would never change, proving that a movement based on truth and intellect was more powerful than any bank account. The graduates of her academy were everywhere, carrying the silent strength of the woman who had taught them how to find their own sovereignty. The city was no more longer a territory to be exploited. It was a system to be improved. As the screen fades to black for the final time, we are left with the image of a single skip stone skipping across the surface of a perfectly calm sea. Each skip represents a life touched, a law passed, and a heart mended. The ripples spread outward, touching every shore and every depth, a testament to the fact that one man's decision to remain human can change the course of destiny for an entire planet. The journey of Leo Wilson, the son of Poseidon, is finally complete. The tide is out, the sun is up, and the world is finally, perfectly, whole. And so, we finish the full 60-minute circle. From the moment the truth was hidden in a garage, to the empire that was built on the truth, Leo walked away from a god and walked toward a man who turned out to be his true partner. He proved that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with your own worth. May his story be the fire that lights your way out of the shadows and into the light. Remember, you are not a bet, you are a winner. You are not a pawn, you are the architect. The reign of light is your destiny.